Bonjour à tous, Jean Librero pour la chaîne GlobalETs qui a été créée au début de l'année 2025. Nous avons réalisé 3 interviews jusqu'à présent. La chaîne GlobalETs est destinée à faire connaître des auteurs, des chercheurs, étrangers ou français, anglophones, hispanophones ou francophones, pour enrichir les échanges, bien entendu, entre tous les ufologues. Je suis Jean Librero, donc éditeur de Flying Disc France depuis 2019. J'ai publié plus d'une quinzaine de titres jusqu'à présent. Cette présentation est destinée à introduire l'interview qui a été faite il y a quelques jours, il y a une semaine, avec Philip Mantle, qui est le fondateur de Flying Disc Press, chaîne éditoriale en Grande-Bretagne, et qui a publié un nouveau livre sur le cas Pascagoula en 2024. C'est un livre qui rassemble les transcriptions de séances d'hypnose qui ont été réalisées sur les témoins du cas Pascagoula, un cas d'enlèvement majeur qui s'est produit en 1973 dans l'État du Mississippi. Donc, avec les 2 témoins du cas, Charles Hickson et Calvin Parker, plusieurs séances d'hypnose ont été réalisées, pratiquées depuis 1973, et il se trouve qu'à l'occasion d'une recherche de Philip Mantle et d'autres chercheurs, de nouvelles séances d'hypnose, les transcriptions de nouvelles séances d'hypnose, c'est-à-dire jusqu'à présent inconnues, ont été redécouvertes, qui a relancé l'enquête, bien entendu. Et donc, Philip Mantle a voulu publier un livre spécifique qui rassemble les transcriptions d'une dizaine de séances d'hypnose qui ont été pratiquées depuis 1973. Donc, c'est une interview d'1h20 qui a été effectuée il y a quelques jours. Je suis en train de mettre au point le sous-titrage, puis la vidéo sera éditée sur la chaîne GlobalETs. Donc c'est une petite présentation. Donc tout d'abord, eh bien, qui est Philip Mantle? Comme je disais, c'est un chercheur-auteur qui a commencé ses recherches en ufologie dans les années 80. Il a publié au moins une dizaine de livres. L'un des livres le plus connus de Philip Mantle est son livre consacré à l'autopsie de l'alien de Roswell, Alien Autopsy, un livre très controversé, un sujet très controversé. Philip Mantle défend l'hypothèse de Spiros Melaris, qui prétend que les films étaient un hoax, un canular, un bien savamment monté. C'est un débat sans fin. Quoi qu'il en soit, Philip Mantle a publié de nombreux livres, il a fait beaucoup de conférences depuis les années 90. Il a travaillé sur le sujet des abductions également depuis les débuts de ses enquêtes. Il a écrit 2 livres sur les abductions, l'un qui s'appelle Without Consent, sans consentement, qui a été traduit récemment en français. Vous pouvez le trouver. Et il a également écrit un livre qui s'appelle Once Upon a Missing Time, qui est un jeu de mots sur il était une fois, Once Upon a Time, Once Upon a Missing Time. Donc, si on peut dire, il était une fois un temps manquant. Donc, c'est un roman. C'est un roman de fiction, mais Philippe m'a expliqué précisément que cette fiction est basée, entre autres, sur plusieurs cas authentiques qui sont présentés dans le livre précédent qu'il avait publié, qui était précisément Without Consent. Philip Mantle est donc quelqu'un qui a étudié les cas d'abduction dans l'enlèvement extraterrestre depuis longtemps, depuis les années 80 et 90. Il n'a pas découvert ce sujet à l'occasion de sa rencontre avec Calvin Parker. Donc, pourquoi présenter cette interview plus précisément? Parce que ce livre donc, que j'ai traduit et publié, qui s'appelle Pascagoula 1973, les transcriptions des séances de régression hypnotique 1973 à 2022, et le 5e livre consacré à au cas Pascagoula depuis 2018. Donc, compte tenu que le cas n'est pas très bien connu du public, ça peut paraître étrange de présenter un livre, sachant que 4 ou 5 livres ont déjà été publiés à ce sujet. Donc, voilà, une petite présentation synthétique pour clarifier le paysage, si l'on peut dire. Philip Mantle a fait connaissance avec Calvin Parker, qui est le deuxième témoin du cas Pascagoula, le premier étant Charles Hickson, qui est décédé en 2011. Calvin Parker était resté silencieux toute sa vie, il avait 19 ans en 1973, et Philip Mantle a fait connaissance avec lui en 2017. En 2017, il avait demandé à republier le livre de Charles Hickson, donc le premier, l'un des deux témoins qui avait publié un livre en 1983. Ce livre était évidemment introuvable, et Philip Mantle a voulu le rééditer. Il a pu obtenir le droit, et en 2017, donc, il a réédité le livre UFO Contact at Pascagoula de Charles Hickson et William Mendes, qui était un co-auteur. Et à cette occasion, il s'est dit qu'il serait intéressant d'obtenir le témoignage de l'autre témoin, donc, qui était resté silencieux toute sa vie, Calvin Parker. Il a pris contact avec Calvin Parker, et par un enchaînement de circonstances qui sont bien décrites, et je vous laisserai découvrir, c'est très intéressant, eh bien, Calvin Parker a finalement donné son accord pour écrire, avec le soutien, le conseil et l'aide de Philip Mantle, donc son premier témoignage, ce qui a été publié en 2018, Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter. Et un deuxième livre a été publié en 2019, une suite, toujours par Calvin Parker et Philip Mantle. Un troisième livre a été écrit en 2021, 2022, Beyond Reasonable Doubt, coécrit par Philip Mantle et Irena Scott, qui est une chercheuse, une ufologue américaine très respectée, qui a organisé plusieurs symposiums annuels du MUFON. C'est une femme une scientifique de formation, et qui a beaucoup étudié, entre autres, l'Institut Battelle et la base de Wright-Patterson, pour ceux qui connaissent ces sujets. Donc, des sujets très pointus concernant le secret OVNI, le secret d'État, le cover-up qui a été pratiqué par les militaires du gouvernement sur les crashs d'OVNI en particulier. Le livre Beyond Reasonable Doubt, coécrit par Irena Scott et Philip Mantle, est consacré aux nouveaux témoins qui sont apparus à partir de 2018, entre autres un couple, Vernon et Maria Blair, dont il est avéré à présent, sans aucun doute, qu'ils ont été enlevés, eux également, le même soir, la même nuit du 11 octobre 1973, sur les bords de la rivière Pascagoula, quelques moments après l'enlèvement qu'ont subi Charles Hickson et Calvin Parker. Et ça paraît stupéfiant, oui. Eh bien, vous découvrez tout cela, je ne dirais pas en totalité dans l'interview de Philip Mantle, mais vous commencerez à comprendre, et bien sûr, c'est dans le livre plus clairement que vous approfondirez votre connaissance du cas Pascagoula, qui éclaire le sujet abduction dans son ensemble. Donc, en l'occurrence, le livre qui est publié a été publié en 2024 en anglais, en traduction française en septembre 2025, Transcriptions de séances d'hypnose, éclairera tout le monde, c'est-à-dire les gens qui découvrent le sujet abduction. Là, ce sera vraiment un plongeon, une immersion dans le sujet, avec les transcriptions de séances d'hypnose qui sont longues et nombreuses. Et pour les amateurs éclairés, comme on dit, beaucoup de réflexions sont proposées. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on peut dire concrètement, sur les contenus du livre? Pourquoi ces nouveaux livres 2018, 2019, et qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Beaucoup de témoins se sont révélés à partir de 2018, quand Calvin Parker a commencé à donner des conférences, des interviews. Il avait a été orateur dans plusieurs conférences. Il était en 2019 à Phoenix, à l'International UFO Congress. Il a fait connaissance avec Kathleen Marden, l'une des plus grands experts des abductions dans le monde, et il a demandé lui-même à Cassine Marden de pratiquer une séance d'hypnose sur lui, ce qui a été fait en septembre 2019. Alors, à l'occasion des recherches de Philip Mantle, quand ils ont coécrit le premier livre en 2018, le deuxième en 2019, eh bien, ils ont consulté, enfin, Philip Mantle a consulté des ufologues aux États-Unis et tous ceux qui avaient connu la première recherche sur le cas, puisque en 73, eh bien, il se trouve que J. Allen Hynek, le grand, fameux Allen Hynek, était venu lui-même avec James Harder, un enquêteur respecté de l'APRO, Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, qui était l'un des plus importants groupes de recherche ufologique à l'époque. Donc James Harder est venu de Californie, de Berkeley, où il était professeur, et Allen Hynek est venu de Chicago, où il était astronome, professeur d'astronomie. Ils sont venus en même temps et ils ont interrogé les deux témoins 2 jours après l'événement, c'est-à-dire le samedi 13 octobre 1973. Ils ont pratiqué une séance d'hypnose sur les témoins. Par la suite, d'autres personnes connues ou moins connues ont été impliquées, et on a découvert, à l'occasion de la recherche de Philip Mantle 2018-2019, que Bud Hopkins, le grand Bud Hopkins, qui est véritablement l'un des principaux pionniers des recherches sur les abductions, avait effectué 2 séances d'hypnose sur Charles Hickson en 1985 et en 1989, et une séance sur Calvin Parker en 1993. Ces découvertes ont été faites grâce à la collaboration de différents chercheurs, entre autres Peter Robbins, le grand Peter Robbins, qui est connu en France et qui a révélé, communiqué à Philip Mantle effectivement cela, et que les archives de Bud Hopkins étaient entre les mains de David Jacobs, qui a été l'associé dans les recherches ufologiques, associé de Bud Hopkins depuis les années 90, depuis la fin des années 80. Et donc, David Jacobs a été contacté par Philip Mantle, et il a communiqué les copies des cassettes, des cassettes d'époque, des mini-cassettes, à Philip Mantle, qui a réalisé les transcriptions de ces enregistrements, 85-89 pour Charles Hickson, 1993 pour Calvin Parker. On apprend beaucoup de choses, des événements concernant l'enfance, des épisodes liés aux enlèvements dans l'enfance de Charles Hickson, dans l'enfance de Calvin Parker, et on apprend un événement encore plus important, tout aussi important. C'est un enlèvement subi par Calvin Parker en 1993, soit 20 ans après l'incident de Pascagoula. Il avait 19 ans en 73, il avait 39 ans en 1993, il a subi un autre épisode d'enlèvement. Je n'en dis pas plus ici, mais croyez-moi, ça fait beaucoup réfléchir, ça donne beaucoup d'enseignements, d'éléments de réflexion sur le phénomène abduction. Que dire, d'autres témoins ont été donc découverts, comme je disais, Maria Blair et Jerry Blair se trouvaient sur l'autre bord de la rivière Pascagoula cette nuit du 11 octobre 1973. Ils n'étaient pas pêcheurs, n'étaient pas des amateurs de pêche comme Calvin et Charlie Hickson. Jerry Blair était un marin de la marine marchande, plus exactement. Il travaillait sur les plateformes pétrolières. Il attendait son employeur qui allait le récupérer en bateau ce soir-là, et il attendait donc son employeur sur le bord de la rive en compagnie de sa femme, et leur voiture est dans la voiture était garée en bord de la rivière. Et ils ont vécu quelque chose. Voilà, ces témoins sont apparus parce que une vidéo de Calvin Parker a été mise sur YouTube à l'occasion des interviews qu'il a données à partir de 2018-2019. Et une jeune femme a dit: mes parents ont vu cela. Et je vous épargne les détails. Et on a donc le témoignage et les séances d'hypnose pratiquées sur Maria Blair. Jerry Blair, malheureusement, il se trouve qu'il a pu faire, non pas malheureusement, mais en l'occurrence, il a fait une confession sur le lit de mort, comme on dit, confession à Philip Mantle avant de mourir. disant qu'il avait menti, qu'il avait été témoin de tout ce qui s'était passé cette nuit-là, qu'ils avaient subi eux-mêmes une expérience. Et Maria Blair a demandé une séance d'hypnose. Philip Mantle a refusé d'abord, compte tenu qu'elle était en train elle vivait le deuil de son mari. Il n'a pas voulu l'exposer à un traumatisme plus violent encore. Et 2 ans après, elle a renouvelé sa requête et Philip Mantle a accepté. Ils ont trouvé une hypnothérapeute, Crystal Slaughter. Voilà, il y a énormément donc d'informations dans ce livre, les transcriptions de séances d'hypnose, qui est disponible en Kindle, en version papier depuis Kindle depuis début août de cette année, en version papier depuis septembre, début septembre de cette année. Et voilà, donc j'espère que beaucoup d'entre vous écouteront cette émission avec Philip Mantle. Qu'est-ce que je peux annoncer? Eh bien, les futures émissions pour GlobalETs. Je ne peux pas vous donner de date ni de nom très précis, mais on aura Malcolm Robinson, qui est un chercheur écossais qui vient de publier un nouveau livre, un volume 3 sur les cas ovnis en Écosse. Très riche. J'ai déjà publié un livre de cas de Malcolm Robinson consacré au cas Livingstone, au cas Robert Taylor, un cas d'enlèvement euh, très, très intéressant, comme on dit, et connu des amateurs, très connu des amateurs avertis, qui s'est passé en 1979 en Écosse. Roberto Pinotti, qui a publié l'an dernier un énorme livre sur le cas Magenta, le cas de crash d'OVNI au nord de l'Italie à l'époque fasciste en 1933. C'est le seul cas de crash qui est mentionné spécifiquement par David Grutch dans ses auditions, dans ses divulgations, mentionné également par Luis Elizondo, comme beaucoup d'entre vous le savent certainement. Un énorme livre de Roberto Pinotti qui m'a demandé personnellement de traduire son livre. Et c'est une grosse tâche et une grosse responsabilité. Je rappelle que j'ai publié auparavant Contact OVNI en Italie, le premier volume. Il est sorti en 2020. Un très très beau livre avec une magnifique préface de monsieur Eric Zurker que je remercie ici à nouveau. Vraiment une très belle et très honnête préface d'un des plus importants chercheurs français qui rend hommage à Roberto Pinotti. Thiago Tichetti, un grand chercheur brésilien dont j'ai traduit Contact OVNI au Brésil en 2021 et qui actuellement vient de publier un livre consacré à Colares. Cassie Marden, la grande Cassie Marden sera invitée sur GlobalETs bientôt. Irena Scott également. Beaucoup d'autres. Donc je vous remercie pour votre attention et je vous dis à très bientôt sur GlobalETs. Hello, Philip Mantle.
Good afternoon, John. Nice to speak to you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for being here today. We are on Saturday, September 13th, 2025. We welcome you, Philip, for an interview to this new channel, GlobalETs. It is a second interview that will be recorded with a channel. The first one was with Preston Dennett, author whom you know.
Yeah.
And it was in June 2025. So we're welcoming you today, Philip, to a first interview with you to this channel. And actually, you were invited in a few shows in France. You were invited to BTLV with Bob Elanca a few years ago, but you have not done many shows in France yet. And with your agreement, we plan to make several shows with you in order to introduce your work of investigation and the author, and to introduce other fields, other UFO investigation or other authors, of course. Anyway, today we're here to introduce to the French public again the Pascagoula abduction, UFO abduction event, which took place in October 11th, 1973, and you have carried out a very long, courageous, persistent investigation on this case since 2018 or before 2018, helping witness the very important witness and subject and victim of UFO abduction, Calvin Parker, since that time. So, in short words, Philip, what can you say about the coming out of the Pascagoula case, which was known since 1973, but how it came back in 2018 with Calvin Parker?
Yeah, I mean, back in October 1973, when the event happened, Calvin initially didn't want to talk about it to anyone at all. But he was only 18, John, was getting married the following month of different time. However, his older colleague, Charles Hickson, age 42, thought it was important. For example, after the event, he said these things could come back and do this to someone else. So they made an agreement that Calvin would talk about seeing the UFO, seeing the door open and the creatures coming out, but he wouldn't go any further than that. The rest would be left to Charlie. Both gentlemen were scared by this, Charlie, but Charlie had fought in the Korean War in the US Army and had seen some heavy fighting, so he'd more experience. Calvin had none of that, and he was scared to death. I mean, literally scared to death.
He said that, yeah. He had never been so scared when he was in the war Korea.
Yeah, so, so the story got out, and Charlie would be the front man. He would be there telling the story. He felt it was important. Within a couple of weeks, Calvin had gone back home. You have to remember, he wasn't from this area. He'd gone out there to work. He actually lived in Laurel, Mississippi, which is 150 some miles away. And then he ended up in hospital, and he pretty much left it to Charlie. Now he got married the following month to his fiancée
Wayne,
who stayed with him right until he died in 2023. And in 2017, as you know, I'd been running Flying Disc Press for a couple of years, and I'd always been interested in this case, John. I had a little thing in the back of my mind about it, and we realized that I didn't have a copy of Charlie's book. He wrote a book with William Mendez called UFO Contact Pascagoula, and it came out in 1983. It didn't sell a lot of copies, therefore, to buy a copy online, they were quite rare. But nonetheless, I bought a copy, and I thought, it would be nice to republish this book and maybe get an interview with Calvin. I was pretty sure he was still alive. Charlie had died in 2011. So I got the permission to republish it, and then I set about to try and find Calvin Parker, just for an interview, John, nothing else. Took me a few months, but I found him. I got an email, I emailed him, and he gave me a phone. I rang him. He was very nice, very polite, but didn't want to talk really at all, So I understood that, I'm somebody who's approaching him completely out of the blue. He didn't know who I was. However, what I didn't know, Jean, that just a few weeks before I phoned him and his wife Waynette had been to the funeral of a friend. And as they're leaving the funeral home, there's a book of condolence. And Calvin signed it, Calvin Parker. And then those behind him who saw it started pointing and winking, the alien man. And he was not amused. So Waynette had said to him, why don't you write a damn book? Tell everybody the story. Even she didn't know the full story after all these years. And he said, yes, darling, of course, darling. He had no intention of doing it, Jean. And he told me this story. So I said, well, why don't you write a book? I'll publish it. And he said, Philip, every time I do an interview with somebody or whatever, it always turns out wrong. So I said, well, what I'll do, I'll put in the contract that I cannot publish it without your permission. So if you're not happy with it, that's the end of it. So we agreed, and I sent him a contract, and we would literally do one chapter at a time, Jean. You know, he'd send me it, and I'd go back and say, describe some more about that, please. I don't understand that bit. And in the end, I mean, Calvin wouldn't even let me change the spelling errors because he wanted those that were reading it to know him, his character, not just what happened to him, you know, a bit more about Calvin Parker. So we published it in 2018, you know, Pascagoula, the closest encounter. Much to our surprise, it was well received. Calvin was interviewed on television, both locally, nationally, and internationally. And there was a big difference now, Jean. Back in 1973, Charlie and Calvin had been made fun of. You know, people just laughed. Cartoons were drawn in the newspapers about them. But this time around, that didn't happen. So Calvin went on the record and told his story for the very first time. Even his wife, who was his fiancée at the time, even she didn't know the full story until then. And that's how it all began, John. That's where we started.
That's very great to remind that for any public, English-speaking public in the United Kingdom, in America, any country in the world, and in French-speaking country as well, because we will have subtitles in French, to understand that this happened because you had the idea to publish Charles Hickson book from 1983, and you published it in 2017, and then you thought that it would be great to have a book by Calvin Parker, and at the same time his wife encouraged in him to get rid of this heavy memory, this painful memory, and to be able to live better with this memory. So these two lines met at this very time.
Yeah, he felt relieved that he'd done it, Jean. He said, I should have done this a long time ago. I said, well, you know, we can't go back in time. Forget that. We can only deal with it now. And away it went. And of course, a local newspaper, they interviewed Calvin, but that local newspaper was owned by a national newspaper in the United States. So the article ended up in the national news media as well. And then Calvin was then, you know, speaking to the media, got invited to UFO conferences, which he'd never done before to any great degree, John. He'd done some small events. And he was amazed how people looked up to him, you know. And he said, well, I'm just an ordinary guy. I said, yeah, but, you know, you've been there. You've experienced this phenomenon firsthand, Calvin. You know, right in it. These people haven't. And they appreciated you telling what had happened. And, you know, he was glad he'd done it, John. It's as simple as that.
Yes, Philip, I've talked to Kathleen Marden several times. I translated an interview with her in 2018, I think. It was a long interview on her work with Betsy and Barney Hill case, of course. But recently, I talked to her after we published Calvin's book in 2019 with Flying Disc France, with your support. I talked to her, I think, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and she reminded me how she met with Calvin at the International UFO Congress in 2019. And she told me, and I knew that Calvin was a speaker there. He was surprised to be a speaker among many authors, many famous investigators. Here, a simple guy, and to catch attention. And Kathleen told me that his speech was very impressive because he was an
Yeah.
ordinary guy, precisely because he was not an academic. That's why he touched the people.
Yeah, he was a very humble man. I mean, I became very good friends with Calvin. I used to speak to him on a weekly basis, sometimes more than that. And I even spoke to him on the phone a few days before he passed away. And he had a great sense of humor, but he was also the type of person, John, if he didn't want to talk about something, then he wouldn't. And there was no amount of persuasion would change his mind. So he told me other aspects of his life slowly but surely when he was ready to tell me. For example, he had a son at one point and his son died. And it took him 2 or 3 years before he told me about this. And
I remember now.
there were parts of his experience, his encounter, that he did not like talking about. It still bothered him, John. So I never pressed him on it, and I knew he will talk to me about it when he's ready. As simple as that. And of the handful of conferences he did, the audience were captivated by Calvin because he was just an honest gentleman from, the southern United States recounting what had happened. No frills, nothing like that. And he was amazed how well he was received. And sadly, he took ill and was unable to do any more conferences, but he wanted to do more. And he was very, very well received, as Kathleen has told you as well.
Yeah, I took part in an interview to him with a group in Paris called OVNI Paris, and it was recorded on this interview. The technical quality was not very good. We had to do it through the screen of a computer because the general screen of the hall did not work this time. So there was quite a few people. There were like 100 or 200 people there, and very interested. And I had a difficulty in translating his intonation in southern Mississippi voice, and had to ask people to be very quiet because it was hard because of the technical sound quality to catch his words.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, John, because as our investigation grew, we found out that Calvin and Charlie had undergone regressive hypnosis with the late Bud Hopkins. Calvin in 1993 and Charlie twice in the 80s. And I managed to get the recordings of these hypnosis sessions, which you've recently published, of course. They're all transcribed in the recent book. But I know how you feel because I got these on cassette tape. I had nothing to play them on because who uses cassette tapes today? Nobody. So I bought a cassette player and some earphones, and I'm trying to transcribe this hypnosis where they're talking quiet anyway. So you have Calvin in his southern Mississippi accent. Then you have Bud Hopkins with his New York accent, And then there's me. I come from the north of England. I have a different accent to them all. And it used to take me about 20 minutes just to get going to figure out what they were talking about. And of course, there are certain differences between American English and English, some of which I didn't understand, and I used to ask Calvin, what does this mean, And so I understand what you're saying, John, about trying to translate the accent. But that's who Calvin was. He was, a gentleman from Mississippi, and that's it.
Yeah, really, very impressive. Very hard the first time for a French person like me. It was difficult at the beginning.
But
Anyway,
I think his accent and his humility, John, endeared him to people when they heard him speak, be it on something like this or on television or in person. He was very endearing.
He did not finge anything. He comes straight how he is. Yeah, we miss him. I had the opportunity to talk to him several times. It's true. He's so kind, so heartful, and we feel we are friends with him at first sight, because,
Yes.
as you say, he's humble, simple, genuine, and striking, because we understand someone like that cannot lie, cannot pretend anything that would not be true. He had no reason either. Anyway, okay, we are going to we'll ask you to recall the story, the event, because there are people here who don't know the story, in short time, and we will display a few images, a few pics, that get
By all
ready.
means. Well, like I said, Calvin lived in Laurel,
Wait,
Mississippi.
wait a second. I ask Nicolas to put up some pictures, okay? And we'll get started. Nicolas, non, tu le mets à partir de la 5, de la numéro 5, de la 4, un peu après. Tu m'entends? Non, le numéro après. Voilà, là c'est bon.
Well, there's Calvin.
Voilà.
He was in Laurel, Mississippi, and he was working all the hours God sent because he was getting married the following month.
Mm-hmm.
And his fiancée, Wayne, said, it'd be nice if you could get a steady job. I don't see any of you. So Calvin mentioned this to his father. And his father said, well, why don't you ring Charlie Hickson up? Their families had grown up together. So Calvin's father and Charlie Hickson were friends. Calvin was a friend of Charlie's son, Eddie. Yeah. He says he's over in Pascagoula. He's a foreman in the shipyard. Huge shipbuilding was going on the river there, and still is today, John. So Calvin rings Charlie and he said, yeah, we're hiring. So he got him a job. So the idea was that Calvin would go to Pascagoula, stay there Monday to Friday with Charlie, pay him some lodgings, and then go home on a weekend. And if all worked well, maybe when they got married, they'd move out there. So October the 11th, 1973, was Calvin's first day at work in the shipyard. And he didn't know this area at all.
I didn't know that. I didn't know it was his first day.
First day. Mm-hmm. He got a brand new car. It was a Hornet Rambler, bright yellow. So he took Charlie and him to work. And one of the pleasures that both guys had was fishing. They loved to fish. So on the way home, Charlie said, do you want to go fishing tonight, son? Oh, yeah. So they went home, had a bite to eat, got the fishing tackle, and Charlie says, I'll show you where to go. So they got some bait. They went down to the Pascagoula River, which is not an out-of-the-way place, John. This is not in the middle of nowhere, but it was a bit what we call run down. It was a bit of a dump at the time. Not now, but it was then. So they drove in, parked the car. As they're driving in, Calvin said there's a no entry sign, and he mentioned that to Charlie. Charlie said, don't worry about it, son. I come here, I've fished here, no problem. So they went to one spot. There was a lot of insects there, so they moved, and there was an old pier that had belonged to an old shipyard that is now closed. So they sat on the edge of this old pier, Jean, with their rods in the water. There is a bridge either side of them, one for the rail, one for the road. There is buildings behind them, both commercial and residential. In front of them is the shipyard on the other side of the river. It's a lovely evening. The moon is out and they're fishing away.
I'm asking Nicolas to put the picture. Nicolas, tu peux nous mettre la 6, c'est le ponton.
Well, that picture you see of Calvin there is at the shipyard. This is the old pier they were sat on. You can see the bridge in the distance where the traffic goes over. Now, they both hear the little buzzing sound. And then Calvin said there was a blue light came out across the water. And he thought, oh, no, it's the police. We're going to spend the night in jail for trespassing. We shouldn't have ignored that no entry sign, you know?
Yes.
So they both looked around. Of course, it wasn't the police. It was an oval-shaped object. We call it a rugby ball with two lights on one end. It came down. It stopped about 2 feet, half a meter off the ground. And then on the other end, this opening appeared. And these three humanoid creatures came out. They're literally floated out. They didn't touch the ground, headed towards Charlie and Calvin. They both described them as being about 5 feet 4 inches tall, bulky, head, no neck, long arms, legs that were stuck together. They had pointed protrusions out of the side and out of the front of the head, mitten or crab-like claws. They were grey in colour, but they were wrinkly. And they described them as like elephant skin, wrinkled like elephant skin. 2 got hold of Charlie, 1 got hold of Calvin, took them towards this thing. They both went in through the opening. Calvin was taken to the left, Charlie to the right. Calvin said he was placed on a transparent bed or table of some description, and it was lying at an angle. They were both paralyzed. They couldn't move. The only thing they could move, Jean, was their eyes. This creature stood back, and Calvin said this thing came out of the ceiling. He said the light was just coming out of the walls. He couldn't understand that, but this thing came down. It was like about the size of a pack of cards. And it stopped in front of his face, went around him, making a clicking noise, and then went back where it came from. There were no wires, no protrusions, nothing. And then from behind him, he heard a noise, and another creature approached him. And this time it was a woman, looked pretty much like a human female, apart from the fact that her middle fingers were very long. She pushed Calvin's chin down, put her fingers inside him. It hurt. And he heard this message in his head: we won't hurt you. We won't hurt you. And then she went. Calvin was taken back outside, placed on the pier. Charlie said he was suspended. That was his words he used. He didn't see any table, but he was just suspended in midair, Jean. Mm-hmm. This thing came out of the wall in front of him. He said it was about the size of a basketball. And it looked like a big eye. And instead of going around him like that, like Calvin had, it went the other way around. Round him and round him and round him, and then back into the wall. And then he was got hold of by these creatures again, put back on the pier. And he said he stumbled a little bit. His legs were a bit wobbly. And he says Calvin was stood there like this, with his arms out in front of him, pointing to the water. So he got up and he grabbed him and he said, "Are you all right? Are you all right, son? Are you all right?" And they looked round and this thing was poosh, gone. I mean, literally gone in a flash. They sat on the pier for a good while discussing what they were going to do. And they agreed, we're not going to tell anybody. Don't think we are crazy. We think we are nuts. So they walked back to Calvin's car. Charlie opens the passenger side. All the glass falls out of the window. Bear in mind, this is a brand new car, John. Calvin got in, tried to start it. It wouldn't start. He says it took him at least 20 attempts to get it to start.
He felt like something like a magnet, his watch or his belt.
Yeah, well, they didn't
to the door.
Keys. They didn't wear watches. Neither gentleman had a watch on.
I know, his belt, I think, something was sticking
keys.
to the door.
It was his keys.
His keys, yes.
Yeah, so they set off, and it was at this point that Charlie had a change of mind. He said, no, we should tell someone, because what if these creatures come back and do this to someone else? What if this is the start of an invasion? So they pulled into a little shop, a little store, which had a payphone. And about 30 miles out of town was Keesler Air Force Base. So Charlie, with his military background, thought that's the place to call. They rang Keesler Air Force Base and they said, we're not interested in UFOs anymore. Call your local authorities.
They were lying, actually, Philip.
Calvin was as mad as hell. He's saying, get back in the car, forget it. We're not telling anybody. But no, so Charlie rang the police. They put him through to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, and they left. They literally laughed on the phone. But they said, "Where are you?" I said, "Right, we'll come and get you." So they sent a car out. They give them a sobriety test, walk up and down and put your finger on your nose and all that kind of thing. And they escorted them into town. Sheriff Fred Diamond was in charge with Deputy Glenn Ryder. They interviewed both men separately. And then they put them both in a room together.
Tu peux nous mettre l'image, Nicolas? C'est la 17, Fred Diamond, Sheriff Fred Diamond.
That's Sheriff Fred Diamond. So they put them in a room together, and the deputy did something with the desk drawer. I mean, he said, "I'm just going to go get some coffee, guys. Back in a minute." So 5 to 6 minutes later, he comes back again. He goes to the drawer in the desk. They have no idea what he's doing. Unbeknownst to them, Sean, he had put a tape recorder on and recorded them in secret. Took the tape to the sheriff. They played it back and they thought, "We'll have these two rednecks now. They'll be laughing and joking, But of course, when they played it back, that wasn't the case. Calvin was literally crawling up the walls, John. He was that scared. And Charlie's saying, I thought I'd seen everything. I thought I'd seen everything, but my God, So now the sheriff, Fred Diamond, and his colleagues tended to believe them. But he said, "There's nothing we can do, guys."
Excuse me, Philippe. Nicolas, tu peux nous mettre la 18, la suivante. Here's a pic of Charles Hickson after seeing the tape.
After listening to it sometime later, yeah.
That's with you, of course, in 2000.
Yeah.
No, not with you, but in I don't know, sometime after.
Yeah, so they went home.
He was shocked.
And the next morning, they went to work. And they noticed there was a few more cars there than should be. They hadn't been at work long, John, when they were summoned to the boss's office. And the sheriff was there. And he said, "What the hell have you two been up to? The telephones will not stop ringing."
Tu mets la 5, Nicolas, s'il te plaît.
Yeah, the telephones would not stop ringing. That's Charlie and Calvin. And, there's news people outside. "What the hell have you done?" So they told their boss what had happened. So they decided to take them to the hospital for a checkup, the Singing River Hospital. The Pascagoula River is also known as the Singing River. They went to the hospital. Everything was fine. And I think it was Sheriff Fred Diamond who said, "What about radiation?" And the hospital says, "We can't check for that, but Keesler Air Force Base can." So the sheriff phoned the base and they said, "Come straight away." Bearing in mind, they turned them away the night before. So Calvin says when they got to Keesler Air Force Base, they were there ready and waiting for them in the hazmat suits. And they, they checked them over. Everything was fine. But they said, "Gentlemen, while you're here, why don't you come on in and tell us what happened last night?" So they did. And what is interesting, John, they didn't have a tape recorder playing, but they had a stenographer. Like they use in court to record everything in the court.
Yeah.
So they had a stenographer record the whole conversation. And we have a copy of that. So everybody who was there, all the military, they're all named, everybody's there, and we have it. And that was it. The news was out, and that's it in a nutshell, really, Jean.
Philip, for the people who don't know well about the case, or this part of the case, this interview with the military at the Keesler Air Force Base, we had investigators from the NICAP, I remember, who got into contact with the Air Force, with the archive, historical records, and they initially denied having interviewed Parker and Hickson, and the file of the interview was forwarded, leaked years afterwards.
Yeah, many years later, the case was still being talked about and discussed. So it was obtained, and of course, it's unredacted. There's every single word is there in it. We published it in Calvin's book. You know, I think in total it's about 17 pages long, Sean. So we have it in full.
I have translated it, and I try to translate it with the same fonts, you see, as possible. I tried to do it as well.
Yeah.
I could,
But
but
we
I
have
was
it.
very proud to do it.
Yeah, and you know, other researchers have contacted Keesler Air Force Base to try and see if they had any other information, and they've always denied they've got anything. Even Dr. Scott and I wrote to them when we undertook the investigation, and we got the exact same answer, Sean. So whether they did have any more information or not, we'll probably never know. But nonetheless, we have their interview with Charlie and Calvin, and the story made the headlines around the world. I mean, quite literally. And, you know, the news was out, and that was it.
Great. One thing, Philip, we are in 1973, in October 1973, 11th of October. We are at the peak of the UFO wave of 1973.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we didn't realize until later, of course, that there was a wave of sightings across the United States pretty much for the whole year, Jean. And when you look back and look at the statistics now, October seemed to be the peak of it, you know. And why that is, we've no idea. I mean, a gentleman by the name of Webb wrote a booklet called The UFO Wave in 1973. I have a copy of it.
David Webb.
David Webb. So, but that was done some years later, of course, because there was several UFO groups involved. There was APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, on site. Just after the encounter, of course, came this Close Encounters man, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, along with Dr. James Harder from APRO. They were there within no time. They interviewed the gentleman. They listened to the secret tape, as it became known, tried to put both of them under hypnosis, managed it a little bit with Calvin. And we have a very, very poor recording of that, but we have it nonetheless. And they held a press conference before they went home and said these two men are authentic and should be treated with respect, basically. Words to that effect. So other organizations were involved. So the information didn't go to any one place, Sean. It went to several. And it's only some years later when you can compile it and put it all together, realize there was a huge UFO wave throughout 1973. And it seemed that October was the peak of it. Why that is, I don't know.
We still don't know. It was called the year 1973, the year of the humanoid.
Yeah, because this was more than just strange lights in the sky. There were a lot of what Hynek called high strangeness, of course, and said that we should perhaps concentrate on high strangeness cases, because a light in the sky is a light in the sky. Not a lot you can do about it. But when you are up close and personal to these things, it's much more difficult to be mistaken about what you're seeing, John. We all know that there are mistakes all the time when people report UFO sightings, but it's difficult when you are 20 feet away from one of these things and there's strange creatures there as well, you know, and that happened. And that's why it was called the Year of the Humanoids. Kevin Randall, a well-known author, as you know, he wrote a book called The October Scenario, all again about 1973, but with October being the peak of that year.
Yeah, I know this book. I talked to him about this book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, you know, yes, the case is fascinating in its own right, but there was a lot more happening that year across the United States. Probably the biggest flap there's ever been, John.
It's even more interesting because it took place in this very UFO wave across the United States and in other continents, in South America and Europe, there were several cases which are recounted in the booklet by David Webb.
Yeah.
Like I think there are 160 cases in 4 months.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, thank you, Philip. Now, Philippe, Nicolas, tu peux nous mettre les couvertures, s'il te plaît, des, des livres. euh, alors, elles sont toutes au début. Non, la 20, par exemple. La 20, la 21. Voilà. So here, Philip, we are starting with the end. We are going to show your previous book, but here we have the cover of. It is the same cover in English and in French. We agreed on that. This is a colorized pics of the pier.
Yeah.
Which we reminded. So. So, what is the purpose? What is the content of the book? How do you introduce it?
Yeah, I mean, when we started to reinvestigate the case, Sean, as I previously mentioned, we found out that Calvin had been under hypnosis with Bud Hopkins in 1993, Charlie twice in the 1980s, a few years apart. And they both tell a long story, not just about Pascagoula. Calvin had another encounter in 1993, and he had two more when he was a young boy. Again, Charlie had two encounters when he was young as well. We also got the hypnosis from James Harders, which was on the 13th of October, I believe it was, 1973. It's only a short piece, but we have it. And we got some other material. Well, then Kathleen Marden put Calvin under hypnosis in Pascagoula in, I think, 2022.
Non, in 2019.
2019.
Tu peux mettre l'image, Nicolas, s'il te plaît. C'est la 29, la dernière.
Yeah, so, you know, we had the opportunity to do that. And then we had another opportunity to put Calvin under hypnosis in 2022 with Crystal Slaughter. And so I decided to put all of the hypnosis, because it was all over the place, John, into one book. So it's transcribed, you know, every word for word. Also, we had a new witness to these events, a lady by the name of Maria Blair. Maria and her husband, Jerry, were on the opposite side of the river that night. And they saw the blue thing and they had their own encounter. Sadly, Jerry died, but we had the opportunity to put Maria under hypnosis. And we filmed it.
Nicolas, tu peux nous mettre le 12? C'est l'image de Maria Blair avec son mari.
Yeah, so there you have Maria and Jerry from around about the 1970s, a young married couple. Yeah. What happened was Calvin had done an interview for a local newspaper, but they filmed a little piece of him as well. So when you read the newspaper online, you also got this little video. So someone took that video and put it on YouTube. And I was reading the comments underneath it. One of the comments said, "My mother and father were on the opposite side of the river that night, and they too saw the UFO."
I remember.
So I left a message and I found this person. It was a young lady, and her mother and father were Maria and Jerry Blair.
Philip, you had written the article yourself?
No, it was done by a local journalist.
Ah, okay, right.
And it was just this piece of video they put on YouTube. So I asked if we could speak to Maria and Jerry, and she said, "I'll ask my mum and dad." And they said, yeah, they got a phone number. And I phoned them. I spoke to Jerry briefly. He was like a bit like Calvin to begin with. He didn't speak a lot, Jean, you know. But Maria did. And Maria said to me right from the beginning, she said, I often wondered if something like that hadn't happened to us, you know, meaning Charlie and Calvin. But she told us about seeing this blue thing come down the river. It hovered opposite, you know, the other side of the river. And
she saw something else, Philip. She saw a creature.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that. They were actually there because Mr. Blair worked offshore on the oil rigs. And the boat was there, but his boss hadn't turned up. So they were waiting for him. So they decided after seeing this blue thing come down, to take their luggage and put it on the boat. So they're walking down a little pier, and Maria said there's a huge splash in the water next to her. And up out of the water comes this grey man. And it literally was right up against her face, John. And she said it went back into the water and was gone. She threw her husband's belongings onto the boat, and she said this was about 9 o'clock-ish. And then she run down the pier to go back to the car. And she said when she got back to the car, John, it was 12 o'clock.
I had forgotten that, yeah.
So her husband was gone for a few days. The next day she saw the news about Charlie and Calvin. When her husband came home, he says, do not tell anybody. You know, they'll think we're crazy. They had 2 daughters. The lady that told us, Tracy, was the youngest. They told the daughters about the UFO sighting, but nothing more, John. She met Calvin for the first time in 2019. And she did an interview for local news. And again, she told him about the blue light, but nothing more. Then, sadly, Jerry Blair took ill, seriously ill. And he was in the hospital, and he was going to have a small operation. They weren't sure if he was going to survive. So he said to Maria, phone Mr. Mantle now. I want to speak to him. And this is from his hospital bed. And he said, Mr. Mantle, I lied.
It was a deathbed confession.
Yeah, I lied. You know, I saw everything my wife saw. And she even filmed it, did Maria. So we have a little film from a mobile phone of him sat on the hospital bed.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And he had the operation. Unfortunately, he survived. But, you know, it was only a stopgap, John. His days were numbered. So he says to Maria, I've got something to tell you. We too had an abduction experience. And Maria had told me and Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott did most of the interviewing with Maria and Jerry. She said when this thing came out of the water, she could see things out of the side of her eyes, you know, but she couldn't quite make it out, John, you know. And of course, when her husband told her about what was happening, it then it all began to fit into pieces. And out of her peripheral vision, she could see Jerry with 2 of these creatures. And so even though Jerry was very ill, she was as mad as hell with him for not telling her before.
Of course, obviously.
And Jerry said
he was protecting her.
Yeah, he said, I'm just doing it to protect you. Sadly, Jerry died. You know, a few months later, he passed away. Maria came to us and said, is there any possibility of hypnosis? She knew Calvin had been under hypnosis. And we put it off, John. We thought she's still grieving for her husband, you know. She came back some months later and asked again. So I said, look, I'll see what I can do.
Nicolas, tu peux nous mettre la suivante, s'il te plaît?
So,
c'est Maria avec Calvin Parker. C'est la 13.
Yeah, so they have Maria on the right and Calvin. It's at Calvin's home. So what I did, I got in touch with some hypnotherapists online in the local area. I explained what we were after, but not the topic, Jean, not what we were delving into. And one young lady by the name of Crystal Slaughter, professional hypnotherapist, said, yes, I can help. If it's easier, I'll even come to the client's house rather than come here. So we arranged for the hypnosis to be at Calvin's house because she got to know Calvin and Waynet. And I hired a professional cameraman to film it as well, John. And we didn't tell the hypnotherapist anything. We just told her a date, a time and a location. And she put Maria under hypnosis and away she went. When you see the hypnosis, she talks very emotionally. There's long gaps between question and answer.
She's crying. She's crying. She's
she cries. Yes,
deep pain. We see that in the pictures.
Yeah, very emotional. She talks about these creatures wanting her eggs, that they want to create a hybrid, if you like, that can live amongst us but without being recognized. And after the hypnosis, her opinion was that the intended target that night wasn't Charlie and Calvin, it was actually her and her husband, because they were supposed to be there at that location and at that time. Charlie and Calvin only decided to go there that night on their way home from work.
Oh, I understand. I see.
And she believes that they were like collateral damage, so to speak. This is just her opinion, nothing else. And she was very, very emotional afterwards, very emotional. Thankfully, we did the right thing. She was with Waynette and Calvin. She was at the right place. So a few weeks later, we put Calvin under hypnosis again with this lady, Crystal Slaughter, because whilst we had him on tape, we didn't have him on video. So again, I recorded it. By now, Crystal knew the subject matter. I couldn't hide anything from her. So I gave her some questions to ask Sean. The very first question, I said, while Calvin is sat on that river, on that pier with his rod in the water, just ask him to describe what he sees in front of him. Before anything happens, what is the scene? So Calvin says, yeah, I'm fishing away. There's a little boat going up. He even could read the name of the company on the boat. I think he called it Noah, N-O-O-A or something like that. And he said, there's the bridge with the traffic on. There's a bridge there. And just before he finishes, John, he says, oh, and there are two figures on the other side of the river. Are those two figures Maria and Jerry?
He didn't know. He didn't know.
We don't know. You don't know. But if you don't listen carefully, you miss that. So again, all of these are transcribed and are in the new book, which you have translated.
Yes, of course.
And so it's all in there. Every single word, there's nothing redacted at all. Because some people are of the opinion that hypnosis is of use. Some say it's not. We have a piece by Kathleen Marden in it. She's saying it is of use and this is why it's useful. I asked Crystal Slaughter for a comment. I asked Calvin, and I said, is hypnosis of any use to you, Calvin? He said, well, not really, because I can remember most of it. It did clarify one or two things for me, but, he was being honest. That's the way Calvin was. But it is all there, Jean. It's a massive part of the story, whether we want to admit that or not. It is. So we have hypnosis from almost the day after. I think it was 2 days after the event happened with
on
Calvin.
Saturday 13th.
Yeah.
And we are on Saturday 13th September. It was Saturday 13th of October.
And we have it right through until 2022. With Calvin again.
Yeah, very impressive. One question. You say that you directed, you gave a few suggestions to Mrs. Crystal Slaughter, the psychotherapist, in order to ask Calvin what he was seeing on the river, and that this helped Calvin to picture things, details he had not focused his mind.
Yeah,
and
but
he saw the ship.
That's
important to think
it is,
about.
But what I wanted people to know as well, Jean, is the location of where this happened.
Yeah.
This is not in the Mississippi swampland. It's a very busy little place. There's a boat going past. There's cars going over this bridge. There's trains going over that one. There is the shipyard in front of you. There are people's houses and commercial properties behind you. So it's not, as the skeptics would often have you believe, Jean, these things only happen out in the middle of nowhere when nobody sees anything. Mm-hmm. And we knew from the very beginning that there had been a couple of witnesses back in 1973, one of which was called Larry Booth. And we have a vintage piece of film of Mr. Booth on TV. And he remembered it vividly because he was sat watching his favourite TV show. So he knew the date and the time because it was his favorite. The TV show was actually Kung Fu with David Carradine. And he'd watched that. He opened the door. I think he was going to let the dog out, before they went to bed. And this thing is right above his house. So he knew the date and the time without hesitation. So we thought,
well, but wait, Philip, it's important to remind that this witness and some others which are in your first book, and we are going to show the cover in a minute, but were found out after 2018. They were not known.
Well, that's what I was coming to. Mr. Bull was known about back in 1973 because we have him on some vintage film from the time.
Okay.
Then what happened when Calvin's book came out, I was contacted by a gentleman in Greece called Stephanos.
Yeah.
Panagiotakis.
Hello, Stephanos, if you listen to us. Thank you for everything again.
I didn't know Stephanos, but Stephanos had been in the Greek Merchant Navy, and he was also a UFO researcher. And in the 1970s and 80s, he used to write for a little magazine back in Greece. And his favorite case was Pascagoula.
Yeah.
And in 1981, so 8 years later, the ship he was on actually docked in Pascagoula. And he couldn't believe it. So he had
to make some repair for the mechanical damage, I think.
Whatever. So he got a few days to do whatever he wanted. And he was determined to get an interview with Charlie Hickson, which he did. He found him, introduced himself, got an interview, got some photographs with him. Now, Stephanos also went to the local police and said, "Can you help?" He explained who he was. And they said, "You might like to speak to Pastor Sigalis. He saw something that night." And they even had his address. So they gave it to Stephanos. He literally went and knocked on the door. And Pastor Sigalis was of Greek origin. And there's a Greek man standing there in front of you. So he said, "Yeah, come on in." So he interviewed him. Now, the pastor and a chap by the name of Don Broadhurst used to help with a church-sponsored event for people who had alcohol problems. And they were going to one of these meetings that night, October the 11th. They had a young lady in the back of the car. She was a church volunteer. And as they're going along in the car, she's the first to notice it because they're talking. She's sat in the back and she sees this thing, and it came right across them, right over the car.
It was close to Pascagoula.
Absolutely.
A few miles north, I think, going to
but when they drew it, it was very similar to what Charlie and Calvin saw, and it was heading in that general direction. So we had, Stephanos had a transcript of the interview with the pastor, which he gave me. And sadly, the pastor and Mr. Broadhurst had since died, so we couldn't go and re-interview them. But there was this young lady in the back. What about her? So we managed to find her name. It took us quite a while, but she was called Joanne Hallmark.
Yeah, I remember.
She wasn't from the area. She'd gone to live there and work. She worked in the local school, but she was a church volunteer, and she used to play the piano in the church as well, I believe. Now, I looked online for Mrs. Hallmark, and I found a couple of social media accounts she had, John, but they hadn't been used for years. I left messages, got no reply. So about a year later, I just thought one day, I'll go and have another look at these. So I went and had a look, and on one of them, it mentioned a church. So I simply Googled the church, and lo and behold, the church was there. It had its own website. And I logged onto the website, and you could download these sermons. And the sermons were done by a man called Hallmark. And I'm thinking, could this be her son's or even her husband? could still be alive.
This is not told in the book, in your book, Philip.
Well, yeah, it is. We published it. So the church had an email address, just a very general one. So I sent them an email, explained I was looking for Mrs. Hallmark. I didn't say why. And I just said she used to work with Pastor Sigalas in Pascagoula back in the 1970s. If she's there, can you please pass on this email? About 3 or 4 weeks later, Jean, I get a reply, and it's Mrs. Hallmark.
Amazing.
And I'd found an old black and white photograph of her as well. I sent that to her, and now I had to explain why we were looking to speak to her, which I did. I asked for her phone number. Again, it was a few weeks. She replied. She sent us an updated photograph of her, of how she looks today, and gave us the phone number. And I passed that on to Irina, and Irina interviewed her, and she confirmed everything that the pastor of Mr. Broadhurst had said. You know, so we were up and running with new witnesses. Here we had Joan Hallmark. She hadn't stepped forward. We found her, Jean. Because some people said, oh, these people only want their 15 minutes of fame. No, not at all. Had we not done that, we would never have heard of this lady. But it was back to Stephanos and his interview with the pastor that started the ball rolling.
So thanks to Stephanos, who is in Greece, and who published his book with your support, with Flying Disc Press.
Yeah. So, like I said, Stephanos had written a little thing. We put it into a book and we published it. It's only small, and you've done it in French, and we have it in Spanish as well.
I've not done it yet, but I want to do it because I love this book. I really, and I talked to him recently. He told me, when are you going to have my book out? I have several projects presently, but I don't forget. I want to publish your book.
But what it did, Jean, it then gives us the impetus to think, well, if we have this lady, you know, as a witness, are there any others? You know, we knew there was, because again, the location is important, Jean. It's not out of the way. So we move on from that, you know, and we now start to appeal for witnesses. Because we know they're out
now
there.
You're still asking for more. And
because we have to remember Calvin at the time, 1973, was only 18. So there should be plenty of people around his age group. In 1973, I was 15. But there's plenty of people my age still alive. So one of the criticisms back in 1973 is that the bridge on the left was a toll bridge. So the cars came over, had to pay a little fee. And the guy who was in the toll bridge didn't see anything. But they said, oh, nobody saw anything. Well, they were wrong. A gentleman came forward. He was called Mr. Anderson. And he says, that night, I'd been out with my wife. We were driving back home over the bridge. And he said, I could see these strange blue lights. And he described them. He says, they were so low, Philip. They were down below me. We're not talking about high in the sky here, Jean. He said, they were so low.
Yeah, I remember.
I thought they were going to crash, whatever it was. The next day, he visited his aunt who lived down by the river. And she said to him, you never guess what I saw that night. You know? So that was Mr. Anderson. Then Calvin did a book signing in Pascagoula. And a gentleman with white hair, an oldish man, came up, bought a book, talked to Waynette, and said, oh, by the way, I saw that thing that night. And then he was gone. And we didn't have his name. But someone was taking photographs, and we had a photograph of him. So I put that on social media. Anyone know this gentleman, please contact me. A lady at the local library said, I know that. I know him. So I explained why we wanted to speak to him. She said, I'll ask him. And he said, yeah. And his name was Mr. Louis Lee. Now, Mr. Lee was working in the shipyard that night. He was a crane operator.
Yeah.
And he said, Philip.
That's a witness I wanted to ask you about. Very impressive.
My cab is about 10 or 12 feet off the ground. And he says, as soon as I got in it, I could see this thing out over the river. Again, Jean, not up in the sky, out over the river. And he watched it for some time. And it's the only reason I took my eyes off it, because my colleague down below is shouting, I've got to get on with my job. He said, when I looked back, it had gone. I said, did you tell anybody about it? He said, I told my family. I said, did you report it to anyone? He says, Philip, this is 1973. There are no Ghostbusters to report it to. Who the hell would you tell? I told my family, and that's it. So I think it was maybe last year or the year before, Sean, we filmed a little documentary, and Mr. Anderson, who saw the thing when he was going over the bridge, was interviewed for it. And he put a little thing on Facebook, I've just been interviewed about my UFO sighting in 1973. Words to that effect. And there's a few comments below, and there's a lady said, I saw the UFO that night. So I contacted her, asked if she'd, be interviewed. She was called Pamela Rayleigh Eves. Now, Pamela, bear in mind, let's say I'm Calvin, there's the bridge, there's the shipyard. Pamela lived in that direction, about a mile or so. And she said, I was putting my children to bed, and our house looks over the river. And I went to close the curtains, and I could see this blue thing. And that was big. But what was strange was Pamela was the cousin of Mr. Anderson. And neither of them knew about the other's UFO sighting. So that's why it's important when we talk about the location. You've got Charlie and Calvin on the river here. You've got Mr. Anderson on the bridge. You've got Mr. Lewis Lee opposite here in the shipyard. Down here, you've got Jerry and Maria Blair. And then you've got, Pamela about a mile this way. So they are literally surrounded by witnesses, John. Literally.
Yeah.
And more. These are just some examples, but and more.
Yeah, there are more. I may ask you a few more, but anyway, for the moment, Philip, let's go back to your book, the transcripts. You are talking about Bud Hopkins. Nicolas, est-ce que tu peux nous mettre la 26 et la 27, s'il te plaît? S'il est là. So, this book of this is a picture. We have on the right Bud Hopkins, Mrs. Debbie Cowbler on the center, who is an abductee and an investigator, and Calvin Parker. It was around 1993, I guess. So Calvin was like in his 40s, early 40s at the time. He was much bigger than when he was younger, of course. But one aspect of the case, of the Pascagoula case, one important feature of the book, of the transcripts and of the several books you have been publishing, the first two books by Calvin Parker, then the book around Maria Blair with Dr. Rowan Ascott and other witnesses. One important, among many important features of the case and what have been investigated, is the 1993 experience by Calvin Parker on Cat Island, which had been investigated by the same Bud Hopkins. So first of all, because we don't have much time now, and we'll talk another show with you about the case, but can you say a word about Bud Hopkins? Who was Bud Hopkins in a few words, and how did he get involved in the
Pascagoula? I mean, Bud was from New York. By profession, he was a professional artist, Sean. I've seen some of his artwork. Abstract expressionism is the artwork he was involved in. And he'd had a UFO sighting himself, but that didn't get him interested. What happened was, one night where he lived in New York, Bud went to his local store, and he knew the gentleman in it. He'd known him for years, and he was very different this night. He wasn't his usual self. So Bud, being a caring man, asked him what had happened.
It was a man who was selling
liquor.
drinks,
Yeah,
wines, and
yeah, liquor
whiskey.
store.
Yeah. Mhm.
And he told him of this encounter. And it was that got Bod heavily involved. I
And
mean, really,
it happened in New Jersey, I think, close to Manhattan.
that's right. And so Bud became, entranced by this subject. He learned hypnosis, and he set up the Intruders Foundation, which was a non-profit making organizing to help abductees. His first book, Missing Time, was one book that I recommend everyone should read, Sean. I've read it several times myself.
It has been translated into French in the mid of the 90s, but it should be published again. It's a
Yeah.
major book. And Intruders as well. Actually, all the books by Bud Hopkins should
Well,
be
yeah, but I
available.
think Missing Time lays it out how Bud got started and how things began. So in 1993, Calvin went out in a little boat fishing on his own, just gone for a couple of hours. And he said, I look up and there's a cloud, and this cloud opens up. It's not a cloud. He has another encounter. We don't have time to go into it in full detail, but it's the same creatures, the strange humanoid and the female. When he gets back to his car, it's dark. When he comes round, it was daylight. His wife had even been out to see where he was, and she put a note under his windscreen wiper, where are you? So he didn't tell her. His friend was a bit more interested in UFOs and said, there's a conference in Florida, and Bud Hopkins is speaking. So they got in the car and they drove to Florida. I think it's 13 hours to get there, Jean. The conference was in a hotel, and Calvin wouldn't go in case somebody recognized him. So his friend went in, met Bud, explained what was happened. Bud's, here's the key to my room. I'll meet you there, which he did. Long story short, he put Calvin under hypnosis, of which we have a copy of. It was taped. Calvin recounts what happened in 1993, 1973, and two little encounters when he was a young fella and a young boy. We have all that on tape, and that is all again transcribed and in the book, word for word. And so the case now expands again, Jean. It's not just what happened to Charlie and Calvin in 1973. Calvin has another experience 20 years later and recounts two more when he's a young fella. We've got the tapes of Charlie Hickson being under hypnosis with Bud, because Bud's, sadly no longer with us. But I got a copy of the tapes, and he talks about two things that happened to him when he's a young fella as well. And so the case now gets bigger and bigger again. So we start with what happened in 1973. We then have all the witnesses, and there's a lot more than we've mentioned tonight. We have the Blair's encounter on the opposite side of the river. Then Calvin has another encounter in 1993, and two more as a young fella, as does Charlie Hickson. So the case is much bigger than we first realized.
So, Philip, this explains, this describes, the Pascagoula case helps us understand what investigators, major investigators, such as Bud Hopkins, thank you for recording his work from the beginning in New York, and David Jacobs, John Mark as well, and the precursor, another pioneer was Leo Sprinkle, who was involved too in this investigation.
Yes, he was.
Say that abduction is not one experience. Usually, an abductee has to face several experiences. The aliens who practice this thing we call abduction focus on one person, on one family, one generation, and go back to the same, let's say, I would say victim, because I consider this is really a very terrible criminal act, and many people think that way. But there is never one experience, and this Pascagoula case shows this, exemplified it very well through Charles Hickson, who has experience when he was a child with his mother, etc., and Calvin Parker when he was together with his family and Charles Hickson's family, and when he saw this woman in the woods who called him.
Yeah.
Then when he was with his brother and the woman came in front of the window.
Yeah.
So that's kind of terrifying, because we can understand there was a planification of focusing on a target. That was Calvin was targeted from childhood, Charles Hickson as well. So that raises many questions.
All this started because I tried to get an interview with Calvin. Had I not bothered, then we would have not known any of this. It would have been left, gathering dust. And Calvin didn't know that there was a tape recording of the hypnosis with Bud. He didn't know that Charlie had been hypnotized by him. So, I've often said, Jean, when we talk about investigation now, when we're investigating historical cases or vintage cases, that the information we're looking for is probably in somebody's attic.
Yeah.
Or in their storeroom or in the garage.
Terry.
I've tried to tell some of the gentlemen who've been investigating Roswell for decades. Everybody who was at Roswell, Jean, is dead. He's deceased. So we should be looking, what have they left behind? Have they got some paperwork in the attic or in the garage? And that's what we've done with this case. We've said, right, we've got a lot of witnesses, yeah. But we found that there's other documentation, like the tapes from Bud Hopkins, were just lying in storage and nobody knew anything about them. We've managed to access that. And other material has come our way as well.
Can you, we have a few minutes, can you explain how you find this material, how you were informed on these sessions by Bud Hopkins with Charles Hickson, 85, 89, and with Calvin, 93?
Peter Robbins was Bud Hopkins' assistant for many years, and he knew him better than anyone. And of course, he'd met Charlie Hickson and Calvin, and he mentioned it. Now, Bud is deceased. Bud had a huge archive of material. So what Bud did...
Thank you to Peter Robbins for his contribution.
What Bud did, he left his archive to Dr. David Jacobs. So I asked Dr. Jacobs if he could...
But who told you he had left his archives? Was it
Peter Robbins?
Peter Robbins. Yeah.
So I contacted David Jacobs, and he had to get Calvin's permission first. And I said, can you, is there any record of this? And he said, yeah. And he provided us with copies of the tapes. And like I said, I transcribed them and I pressed. What I did with Calvin's tape, so the session he had with Bud Hopkins, I had them digitized, John. I sent it to Calvin. Calvin put it on a CD and then left it. Didn't listen to it for a long time. Then one night, he sat on his porch in his chair in Mississippi. He calls his wife, Waynette, out. He says, I want you to listen to this with me. And he put the CD of his hypnosis with Bud Hopkins on the CD player. And it told Waynette the full story for the first time. And he was very emotional about it. He was a bit scared about what might be coming, but he was quite emotional about it. But he played, and it took him a long time before he played it for the first time, John. So, and that was with his wife, Waynette. So there you go.
I guess Waynette, of course, and Calvin Parker must have been very shocked for several things, but especially the fact that the female was in Cat Island on the incident in Cat Island in 1993, and the same woman, female, that was in 1973. I think it must be a very shocking
That female is the
experience
common denominator between all four experiences. She's in all four of them. So the two when he was a young man, and the one in 73 and one in 93, it's the same female in all of them. What that is, Sean, I don't know, but it just is.
Well, that's
Yeah,
a big issue.
and so, you know, I've been involved in this subject a long time, John, and I know a lot of people, and I've met a lot of people. So when we're looking for information, I just politely ask, you know, and it's worked. And we've gained a lot of information as a result.
Congratulations, sincerely, on my account, as knowing you as a friend. I consider me a friend to you after all these years, but I congratulate you. I thank you in the name of all the people in France, in French-speaking countries, who will try to understand the Pascagoula case through this interview. And I thank you for all the people who are interested in the ET phenomenon, because the Pascagoula case helped us a lot. And that was a incredible investigation you carried out to start in 2017, 18, and
not
all
just
these
me,
witnesses
not
who
just me,
appeared.
Dr. Scott as well, Irina. I wouldn't have been able to do it without
Yeah.
you, but yeah, thank you, Jean. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to Dr. Renau and this investigation into the Maria Blair. Thanks to Maria Blair to have had the courage when we see her crying in the regression. We understand how painful this experience is, and so the same abduction was so. And when we remember Hickson being scared to death, according to what police officers like Fred Diamond and Huntley said, they know that people don't pretend
Well,
when
just to
they are
give you an
very
idea
scared.
of how many witnesses may be available, John, you remember Charlie phoned the police that night, and the police dispatcher put them through to the sheriff's office. That dispatcher is still alive, and he is the son of Sheriff Diamond. And we contacted him, and he told us that night, October the 11th, 1973, he took at least 50 UFO reports on the telephone.
I remember now.
Then he said when he finished his shift, he went back to the station, and there were people there in person reporting it, including one clergyman. Was that clergyman Pastor Sigalis? Maybe. But it just shows you how many witnesses there were to these events, John.
So we only have the part of the ice shelf.
Tip of the iceberg.
Tip of the iceberg. Yes, iceberg as usual. Yeah, thank you. Before closing, Philip, we're going to show the covers of your books, from the beginning. Nicolas, si tu es avec nous, si tu peux nous donner les couvertures qui sont au début, les couvertures des livres. Alors, so this is one of your first books, and it was on abduction cases.
Yeah, the first edition of this was done in 1994. This is an updated version. I think we did it in 2020, so just brought it up to date. But it's all about abduction cases in the UK and nowhere else.
Okay, so we'll talk another time. Thank you. The second, le suivant, Nicolas. This is what is that mysterious book? Once Upon a Missing Time. A very funny title.
Well, this is actually a novel. This is a work of fiction.
I know it is a work of fiction. It is
based on some of the cases in Without Consent. So all of the characters in this book are all real. I've just changed their names and their occupations, but they're all real people.
We'll do a show on these two books sometime, Philippe, if you agree. Okay. Le 9 et 10, Nicolas. Le 9 et le 10, ce sont les couvertures des voilà. So this is your the first book by you by Calvin
Yeah,
Parker.
and that's the second. We followed that up.
And the second one. Et ensuite, un peu plus loin, je crois c'est 14. Oui, le 11. Le 11. Le 11,
Yeah,
voilà.
that's myself and Dr. Scott. Couple of years now since that came out, Beyond Reasonable Doubt.
Yeah, especially on Maria
So you've
Blair.
got a lot of the new witnesses in that particular book.
Yeah, I think that's it. Tu peux mettre là pour terminer le 19, le portrait de Parker. Nicolas, s'il te plaît. Okay, that's Calvin Parker in 2019, 2020.
Yeah, I mean, he often wore that fishing cap, and he actually signed it for me, and I have the cap, and I've donated it to an archive in the United States. But
do you remember what he said about Charlie dropping his fish cane into the water in 1973? And he said a fisherman would never drop into the water. It would like drop his own baby.
Yeah, I mean, that's how much he loved fishing, John. He didn't just like fishing. It wasn't just a hobby. It was a way of life.
So it means Charlie Hickson was really scared to death.
Absolutely.
He did not pretend. Yep. So what would you miss, Calvin? Of course. What in the last word? What was your experience with him? And
well, I still think Calvin may have had more to tell us, Jean, but we will never know, of course. But he was an honest, everyday gentleman. He used to say he wasn't educated, but he wasn't not intelligent. He was an intelligent guy in his own right. And this will sum Calvin up for me. Calvin was dying of cancer, right? He had kidney cancer. His mother was in a nursing home. She had dementia. She couldn't even recognize Calvin. But on a Friday night, Calvin would take his guitar, go to the nursing home, and sing songs for all the people there. And he was dying of cancer himself, Sean. That is the type of man that Calvin Parker was.
That's really love, fraternal love, the real Christian values he showed, because he was a Christian.
Yeah.
He always said he had faith, and he attended church from young. Thank you to you, Philip. Thank you to Calvin for his experience, for sharing all what he lived. And so, Philip, we wish you a good weekend. Thank you for the time, and we'll talk to you another moment with GlobalETs.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. Good afternoon.